Put in your earbuds, pour a cup of tea, or put on your work gloves. It's time for another episode of the No-Till Flowers podcast. As always, I'm your ever-curious host, Jennie Love. Every farm starts somewhere, and it evolves over the years. Today, I'm joined by Beth Resnick from Butterbee Farm, just outside of Baltimore, Maryland, to discuss the nuts and bolts of building a farm. Some of you longtime listeners may remember Beth from season 1 of the podcast. In that episode, we talked in detail about her no-till practices, growing in greenhouses, weed management, and much more. It was a packed full episode, so go back and give that a listen if you haven't already. I've put a link in the show notes, of course. In early 2022, Beth and her husband and farm partner Joshua made a huge move from the well-established farm they'd been leasing for 8 years to a newly purchased farm 40 minutes away. It was essentially starting over from scratch, save for their loyal wholesale customer base. Given this powerful juncture in her life and her business, I thought it would be interesting to have Beth back on the show to dish out the details of building a farm from the ground up, not once, but twice. I know many of you are just starting out and looking for land to farm, and others of you have been farming for several seasons and might be feeling the itch to move and expand. This episode is entirely for you. We talk about finding land and the pros and cons of renting versus owning. After listening, if you're craving more details and sage advice on building a farm, Beth offers an online class on this topic. There's a direct link in the show notes. And even if you aren't planning to build or rebuild a farm, there are still some gems in this chat for you. It's winter here in the Northern Hemisphere. Lots of planning and dreaming boldly. And often it's a precarious time for farmer well-being. Beth and I talk about that a bit here too. If you're feeling seasonal anxiety right now, I hope listening to our heart-to-heart is good medicine for you. As always, a quick word of gratitude to the more than 800 members of the Regenerative Flower Farmers Network, who so generously sponsor this show through their membership fees. The Regenerative Flower Farmers Network is a vibrant community hub for the ever-curious flower farmer, making valuable connections and serving as a repository of articles on regenerative practices. Membership in the network, which costs just $5 annually, goes to support the making of more podcast episodes here on No-Till Flowers. Look for the link in the show notes if you'd like to join the ongoing conversation over there. And with that, let's get into this candid conversation with today's guest, Beth Resnick from Butterbee Farm in Maryland. I have Beth from Butterbee Farm with me again. Beth, you were with me back in season 1. I think were you even the first? No, I think you were the second guest on the podcast that I ever had. So things have really evolved for me and also evolved a lot for you with your farm at Butterbee and all the changes that you've made. So I wanted to bring you back on to the podcast now because you've made a big farm move. And I think there's a lot of insight that you can convey to our listeners about how to find a farm, what to think about in terms of infrastructure and building out the farm and all of that stuff. So this is a question I've gotten from listeners, and I'm really excited to pick your brain today because you're one smart cookie. So thanks for joining me again.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm really excited just to talk to you, and I love listening to your podcast. And yeah, it's great to be back. I'm excited. I feel like this is going to be an exorcism because I haven't really talked about what's been happening with the move in a big sort of look back kind of way yet. So here we go.
Ooh, all right. Well, we're going to dive right in just because there's a lot of meat and potatoes that I can't wait to get out there on the airwaves. So let's start with just do a really, really quick, brief recap of your farming history. So you started flower farming in particular in 2014, I think it was. Is that right? Or am I getting my year wrong?
Super close. Yeah, I started in 2013. So this is our 10th season actively in business. And I started on a 13th of an acre in Baltimore City and then moved the farm out to Pikesville, where I had some family friends that had a farm and they had plenty of property, but they weren't really using it. That's a whole thing too, like how I found that land. It wasn't easy or
Yeah.
simple,
And
but
we'll go into that
it kind of
then.
fell into
Yeah.
my lap.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And then we were there for, I guess, 8 years. And for 6 of those years, we lived on the property and worked for our landlords as groundskeepers. So my husband had that job full time. So he was still around. I always say like he mowed circles around me while I was in the field farming flowers. But he had technically had another full-time job. So, and then we bought our own place and now we're here.
Cool. And you just give listeners an idea in case they didn't hear your first episode, though everybody should totally go back to season 1 and look up my chat with Laura Beth back then, because she had so many amazing insights about just generally running a farm and everything. But just give listeners a recap too of your sales outlets. Basically, you do mostly wholesale, correct?
We do, yeah. Almost probably 95% of what we sell goes directly to florists in Baltimore and DC. And that was the decision we made really early on because when I met my husband, I had just started the farm. I started the farm right before I met him. But when he came on board, he was like, look, we really need to think about what we want our lifestyle to be. He's very smart.
He is smart.
So that's what he said. And he said, we don't want to be working all weekends, right? Because we'll never see the people we love. And so we were like, okay, we're not doing farmers markets because in our area, most of the good ones are on weekends. So that was out. And there were a couple of other sales outlets I already knew I didn't want to do. You know me. So, I have a lot of emotions. So sometimes retail, like face to face with customers, isn't a great thing for me because it's just dealing with a lot of people. So as much as I love people, I sometimes can't handle like their emotional issues. You know what I
Right.
mean?
But for the record, you are excellent with people, but maybe that just doesn't feed your soul, which I can totally relate to.
Maybe that's what it is. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's very nice. Maybe it's more just like my preference. But yeah, so one-on-one relationships that are close is really what I enjoy. And so that's why we kind of dove right into florist sales. And we're lucky to meet Ellen Frost from Local Color Flowers in Baltimore, who kind of single-handedly created a local Baltimore flower movement, I guess almost 9 years ago. And yeah, she convinced me to grow flowers and to sell to her. And we kind of built from there. So now we have about 10 customers, I would say, who buy from us at least once a week, typically twice a week. And the rest of our product goes to, I guess we have over 100 people on our availability list who are not those 10, but they might order, twice a year or just in the fall or whatever.
Wow. That's a lot of customers then to manage in wholesale perspective. So in a future podcast, I might bring you back again to talk about how to manage a big wholesale customer list. But for now, we'll stay focused because I go down rabbit holes way too much on this show. So, so to recap, you started farming about 10 years ago. You were farming in Baltimore on a smaller space, and then you had to move your farm once. And then again, this past year, you moved your farm in 2022, actually. So basically, you've set up a flower farm in particular, a couple times. So I feel like that is a great starting point for helping listeners who are also trying to start a flower farm figure out what they would do and how to do that. So this is the trajectory of our conversation, though. There's so many amazing things in your brain that I could tease out and put on air. But let's start with, how did you find your first piece of land? The very first one, the one that was like a 13th of an acre or whatever it was. How did you do that one? What was that?
Right. Well, these are, the days of Craigslist, just imagine. So internet isn't quite as powerful, I guess, as it
Yeah.
is now. It's 2013. So Craigslist is actually the way that I looked for the most part. I didn't know anybody really in Baltimore. I grew up there and then I moved away for college. And by the time I moved back, I had been away. I had farmed in the Northeast, but I didn't really have that many connections in Baltimore. I moved in with like a high school friend who I didn't know that well into a cockroach infested apartment in Baltimore and was like, looking for land, trying to figure it out. So there is a great organization in Baltimore called the Farm Alliance that kind of brings farmers together who are on urban sites. And that's how I started out, with just this little 13th of an acre in Baltimore City. But that wasn't going to be, my long-term trajectory because it was tiny. Didn't really feel like mine. There were people walking by all the time. I wanted something that was actually a farm. Not, oh my gosh, that sounds terrible.
No,
Maybe we should,
well,
maybe we should cut
okay,
that.
so for the record, I did
Don't
this
mean to
for
offend women.
somebody I was coaching the other day in a seminar. I helped clarify what is a farm, technically speaking, by the USDA standards. Do you know this, Laura Beth? It's basically if you
I
sell,
don't.
yeah, by USDA standards, if you sell $1,000 of something you grew or, livestock or whatever. But basically, if you make $1,000 worth of sales in 1 year, you are considered a farm by the USDA. So you just have to have
Wow.
$1,000 of sales. So that's
Amazing.
yeah, it doesn't take much to
Yeah.
meet the technical terms of it at least.
Right, exactly. Well, what
Yeah.
I mean to say is I wanted to feel like I was on a stereotypical farm. I wanted to feel
Yeah.
like there were rolling hills. I wanted to, have lots of land. So, and I should say, like, call out to the amazing urban farmers in Baltimore. One of them, Maya Cossack from Hill and Homestead, like, she's amazing and her farm is incredible. So, not to
Yeah.
say urban farmers can't be farmers.
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
did I crawl my way out of that hole?
Yes, you did.
Here,
I think
here I am.
safely enough. Yeah. And for the record, I
Okay.
started on a very small space too, and it was a community garden in the
Right.
city. We both have urban farms. I'm in Philly, you're in Baltimore, and I felt the same way. Like my first 2 seasons, I was growing on this very tiny. I don't even know how much. I mean, it wasn't even enough to calculate acreage. It was so tiny. It was like 20 by 40 feet. When I
Right.
look back on that now, I can't believe I did that. But
I know, it's so funny. I know.
yeah,
Where
but
we started.
yeah, and we grew businesses out of that. So you do not have to have a ton of space to start a flower business, to cultivate the flowers, to learn how to sell the flowers. In fact, I think starting small is actually really beneficial. You learn a lot of stuff.
Right.
You cultivate a customer base, and then I think maybe a bigger mistake is the people that start with a whole acre, but they've never sold a flower before. And then they just have a lot of wasted stems because they don't have the demand for it. And that's a lot of effort to go into if you
Right.
don't have what it takes. So I think both of us starting small is good. Starting small is good, everybody who's listening. Small is good. You don't have to have a lot of space.
Small is great.
Small is great. But then you
Right.
do want to get to a bigger space. So tell us your next step from there, Laura Beth. How did you find that
Right.
land? I know you had a personal connection, but just in general, how would you coach people to find a larger space?
Right. The irony is the way that we looked for land in 2021 is the same as the way I looked for land at the end of 2013. I talked to everyone. I looked everywhere. I did literally everything I could think of. So I used Craigslist back in the day. I would post about it. I would be on it all the time. I talked to everyone. I talked to people at the Farmland. I talked to people at Future Harvest, just every organization that has anything to do with farming. I would be like, who do you know? Who can I talk to? I emailed people I knew who were landowners. I drove around and put envelopes in mailboxes. I did this
Wow.
both in 2013 and in 2021. So the way to look for land truly, it's a little different because we were trying to buy in 2021, whereas I was just looking to lease in 2013. I never thought I would own land. I never thought we could afford it. I never even imagined that my business would be as successful as it is.
Yeah.
So at the time, I was just trying to live my best life. I wanted to farm and I wanted to I just wanted to do that so badly. And,
Yeah.
Buying land is a little different. We can talk about that more. But what ended up happening for our first plot of land, or I guess I should say our second, when we moved out to the county, I had an old family friend who was my ex-boyfriend's little sister, actually. So here's really the lesson is just to make ex-boyfriends who are landowners and then farm their land. So I hope that helps
Or
everyone
just
a
make
whole lot.
personal connections. Let's make it a little more
Maybe that's
generic.
what it is.
Yeah, a lot of times it does
Exactly.
come down to personal connections, because that's what happened to me too. Not just to amplify your own story, is that I started in that tiny community garden plot, but then it was like I know I built this demand. I need more space, and I did the exact same thing you did. And I often say that's calling out to the universe. You just start talking about it it. Just talk about it to everybody you know. Mention it to everybody you can. I personally, I was still looking right in the heart of the city, so I was going around looking at like churches that maybe had extra space on the side of their property, or any like open space I saw is like, ooh, I got to stop and talk to that person. And I had a couple of false starts and dead ends and all of that stuff, just like I'm sure you did too. And then it was because I told everybody I knew that I wanted this. One of my friends, her name's Nicole, and Nicole was like, oh, you want space to grow on. And my friend over here, Sam, he has like an acre of land that he's been struggling to maintain, because, who can maintain an acre of land when you have a full-time job? So like she connected us, and that was the beginning of like a huge change in my business. And it's those personal connections that make all the difference. So ex-boyfriends or best friends or whoever, it's just like talk to the universe about it, basically. Tell everybody you know.
Exactly. It's funny for me to hear that you did that too, because I sometimes think like I must just be totally crazy. Like the way I go about this seems so massively like spastic, I guess, but I guess, yeah, maybe I'm not the only person. When you really want something, you'll do anything. So.
Yeah. No, and it is, oh, maybe I'll take a moment to try to articulate this like deep philosophy I carry with me in my life, which I'm not very good at articulating. At some point, I maybe should just write this out and it'll make a lot more sense. But I look at the universe. I don't believe in fate per se, and I do like to think about free will a lot, because I'm an Aries and I like to drive change. Like, let me do it. That's the way I am. But I think I approach life in this hybrid model where I look at it as like a connect the dots picture. And so these dots, the universe sort of has preordained, define universe however you want. But there's these dots out in our own personal maps. And then it's our job with our free will to draw the lines between the dots. So I always feel like the way you draw the lines is by talking about it, by manifesting it, so to speak, by saying to the universe, like, hey, I'm ready now. I know there's this dot out there somewhere. I don't know how to get to it, but I'm gonna like have the faith to just keep moving forward in my own style, in my own voice, with my own energy, and be me. And then the dot, every time I've held to this faith, it works. It really does. I swear it does. So I think you are manifesting that in your own way too over there, Laura Beth.
Well, I love that so much. My motto all of last year while we were moving the farm was trust the process, which I think is my way of saying what you're saying,
Yeah, exactly.
And it really helped and worked. I mean, here we are, so.
Yeah. You are on a new farm, but we don't want to give away all the spoiler bits just yet. So, so let's go back. Okay, so you talked about it enough that somebody said, "Hey, here's land," and so you got into a lease in It's an urban space, but you weren't right in the middle of Philadelphia anymore. You're out in Pikesville, or not Philadelphia. Sorry, Baltimore. I'm in Philly. You're in Baltimore. But you moved out to Pikesville and had a much larger space. So tell us a little bit about that operation, just in general. Like, how did you get started? How did you grow it? And kind of what did you feel in the process of leasing land? What was that like in terms of how you moved forward in building your farm?
Yeah, well, this is the part that'll probably take me some years to unpack on my own. But I guess succinctly, we built up the farm over 8 years, growing essentially a half acre every year.
Wow.
So we started with a half acre and we ended up at about 4.5. Is that right? Did I do the math right?
Yeah, I think so. I just know that's a lot of land, and your farm looked like it was 4.5 acres. So yeah, I'll give that a nod.
Yeah, sure. Right. We also built about 1 tunnel or greenhouse every year and ended up with, I guess, total 7. And we changed our growing practices too a few years in. We started tilling, just how I had learned on farms where I trained. And then we found Jean-Martin Fortier. If I'm saying his name right, I don't speak French.
I don't speak French either. I can never say his name right. I'm sure I butcher it every single time.
That guy.
Yeah.
And yes, and we started using no-till methods probably around year like 3 at the Pikesville farm. And sort of slowly grew our business bit by bit, but I have, looking back, feel like year 5 at the old new place, at the Pikesville place. at year 5 was when things really started to take off, and it felt like people were coming to us instead of me having to knock on doors
Mm-hmm.
and kind of like twist people's arms to
Mm-hmm.
buy from us.
Yeah.
Instead, it felt like I could choose my customers and turn people away if it wasn't a good fit. And it took us a while to get there. And
Mm.
around that same time was when I also hit a good stride with hiring and felt
Mm.
like I knew what I needed and was able to manage people in a way that felt comfortable for me and comfortable for them. So everything kind of came together around year 5.
Yeah, I feel like I hear that a lot. Year 5 is like the make or break. You get up to year 5 as a grower, and it's like, cool, this is all sinking in, and the wheels are clicking. You know, the cogs are moving, and they've caught onto each other, and everything's rolling. Or year 5 is like, I can't do this. So it's like I feel like that's the year I always hear that growers are either in for the long haul or they're not in for the long haul. So if any listeners are approaching year 5, buckle up. And I promise, Laura Beth and I are both examples of you get to year 5 and you power through and you learn better and harder than you've ever learned before, and you can come out the chute on the other end better for it. But there are some people that year 5 is a wall, and then that's okay too. If year 5 is your year to realize this doesn't work, it's not my cup of tea or my bin of worms, whichever way you want to put it. you can go on and support other flower farmers in a different way. So yeah, so
Right.
year
Or
5.
adjust business models
Yeah,
to,
right.
suit your needs. I
Yeah.
often hear people say that they're like really unhappy growing. Like I was talking to somebody the other day, a mentee who was saying they were growing like several acres of peonies.
Mm,
And from what she was saying, it sounded like she wasn't able to take care of them in the way that she wanted to. So one of the things we came to in that conversation was, well, maybe growing peonies is right for you, but maybe just not 3 acres, maybe 1 acre,
yeah,
making it the work more accessible so that you don't feel like you're failing all the time.
right. Yeah.
So there's other ways to adjust after year 5 if you feel like things aren't working.
True, true. Yeah, I think the whole point is that there's an evolutionary process, like your farm evolved tremendously over the past 10 years. And I think everybody's farm evolves throughout the lifetime. Lisa at the Gardener's Workshop talks about that all the time too. And just, the evolution of a farm. It's a complex, dynamic, living creature. It's not just a one-time thing. This is the work of a lifetime, is what I always like to say and remind everybody, because you can get into this funnel tunnel vision of this season, and it's like, yeah, it's actually not about this season. It's about all the seasons and what comes out of all of those seasons. So yeah. So we'll keep taking us through your own farm evolution then. So you're year
Yeah.
5, you hit your stride.
Yes, and you asked about the lease, like
Mm,
what that was
mm-hmm,
about. So the lease agreement that we had with our landlords was actually year by year to
mm,
start. And then a few years in, it became a 3-year lease. And I actually asked for a much longer term lease than that. And what they were comfortable with was a 3-year lease. But then if we chose to leave, or if they asked us to leave, we could have 1 year to do that.
ooh,
So technically, we stretched it to a 4-year lease.
okay.
And there are pros and cons to that arrangement. It's good for everyone in the sense that no one's hands are tied, which is really nice and ended up serving us really well when it was time for us to move on. But it did give me a sense that, not that I couldn't trust our landlords, but that my future was unstable.
Mm-hmm,
And I think there is something to be said. There are so many pros and cons to leasing versus owning. So this is just my experience, which is going to be different from everyone else's. But I think there's something to be said for a sense of just like deep security and
mm-hmm.
knowledge. Of course, you never know what's going to happen to you, right? Like we truly have no control, but we can at least have confidence in our home, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I hope,
Yeah.
at least to a point. And I never achieved that at the Pikesville place because of that short-term lease. And when I asked for a longer lease and didn't get it, it really reinforced that feeling that I was always going to be on kind of unsteady ground if I stayed.
Yeah. Yeah. I also leased land. I still lease land, actually. I still lease an acre, but back in the day, I leased another acre from another organization, and the longest lease they were willing to do was 3 years as well. And that was where all my woodies were. I put all my woodies, which take 5 years to mature to begin with, and then it's like 10 years until you're really actually like making back all the money you invested in the place. Beginner's mistake, for the record. Shouldn't have done that. But I did learn. I learned a lot of things along the way. But yeah, eventually they just didn't want to renew the lease anymore. And it was like, well, I guess I got to walk away from all this gorgeous snowball viburnum, limelight hydrangeas, nine bark, the stuff that had finally become mature. So it's hard to really settle in and plan for a very, very long-term future of the farm. If you're leasing it, it's definitely not as ideal. But there's some pros to it.
But
yeah.
Yes, and we should talk about those.
Yeah.
So one pro, I guess, to planting those woodies, or I guess one way to approach thinking like, should I plant woodies on my leased land, is simply doing the math. I feel confident that we made our money back and then some from planting the woodies that we did and left behind. So, it just kind of depends again on your situation, how long you're going to be there and how much you're selling the stuff for. And there's like so many factors that go into it, but we did leave the vast majority of our perennials behind. And it's a little painful. I think about them sometimes over there 40 minutes away.
You're like, my kids are out there somewhere.
Exactly. But, we could not have afforded to buy land when we started the farm. And by the time year 8 rolled around, or I guess year 9, we realized we could. And that's why we did. It was like one day Joshua woke up and was like, hey, like, could we buy our own farm? And I was like mad at him. I was like, I do not want to do that. Why are you trying to break my whole sense of peace and existence?
Yeah.
And it was definitely an issue for a while. And then neither of us could really shake the idea. And we just realized that we had to, it was like the next thing that was calling us.
Yeah.
So, we could not have done that without our first 9 years in business, leasing at that low rate with like, Joshua making his side income as the groundskeeper on their farm. It had to happen. And not only that, but we learned so much about what not to do.
Right, exactly.
Which we can utilize now.
Yeah. I say make all the mistakes on somebody else's property. That's always what I say.
Exactly.
Make mistakes.
And we did,
else.
I assure you.
Right. So there's no shame in just spending 5-10 years like growing at one space before you try to move to another. I think that one of the challenges is building up so much momentum in one space that then it is hard to steer the ship and change, which maybe is in the cards for you, is not in the cards for you. So, but the only way you get started is often by leasing land. I could not have afforded to buy land. Neither, like you said, you couldn't either. So there's no, for those who are starting in flower farming, who are listening, or any kind of farming, it doesn't have to be flower farming, it's a huge, huge cost to buy land. It's like one of the biggest costs, probably the biggest cost you'll ever put into your business, into your farm enterprise. And to rush into that and to take on that debt load right from the beginning before you even have the sales model and have it all sorted out is like so much extra pressure. And you and I both, Laura Beth, can, bear witness to the fact that like there's so much stress in this business to begin with. Then to feel like, I don't know how I'm going to pay off my loan, how the mortgage is going to come. That's just like another piece that you don't necessarily need to add to the puzzle right away. I think there's a lot of newer growers rushing to buy land, like, oh, I want to buy a farm. And it's like, yeah, maybe, those of you listening, maybe press pause, for better or for worse. You'll have a better idea after the end of this, this episode.
Yeah, draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, exactly. So you rented the land, you build up a huge amount of infrastructure on it. Then one day your husband wakes up and says, you know what, I think we should buy some land. Let's go move the farm. And so how did you work through figuring out that you were actually going to do it? So tell us a little bit about how you thought through that more to decide it was the right thing to do.
It was really emotional. It was super emotional. I also am just like really close with these landlords. I've known them since I was 16. Their daughter is one of my closest friends. It was complicated in a lot of ways. And also, we had just gotten comfortable. Like the thing I kept thinking about was I just don't want to go back to the days when we could only heat the house to like 50 degrees when we couldn't afford to heat it more. And I was cold all the time. I remember like sending work emails with like my full winter coat and hat on. Like, I just didn't want to do that. So badly didn't want to do that.
Oh.
But like I said, it just was, the more we thought about it, or the more I thought about it, I just couldn't, it wouldn't go away. So we actually, unfortunately, were having this revelation when that crazy housing thing was happening post-pandemic, or I guess
Mm.
during the pandemic, and realized we had to try to find a place and buy during that. The other element is that my husband, again, had the brilliant, or we'll see, maybe not brilliant idea of asking my parents to buy the farm with us and to move to the farm with us. They were kind of going through a life change too, where my dad is getting close to retiring. He's a business owner as well. And because of the pandemic, their connections where they live in Annapolis were becoming not as strong because everyone was, going to
Hmm.
yoga classes on Zoom instead of going in
Yeah.
person. And, some people moved, pandemic kind of
Yeah.
made everybody
Yeah, the
mess
community
up.
frayed in some ways, and then other ways community bonded more. But yeah, your existing in-person
Exactly.
community kind of got a little worn and tattered in the pandemic, I think, for
Yes.
everybody. Yeah.
I think so, yes. And as a result, we got to think about, well, what if our future was a shared future? So we started looking for land with my parents, which is very interesting, I can tell you, because all four of us have slightly different priorities and things that we want. So trying to find a piece of land that like met everyone's requirements is no piece of cake. So it took us about a year. But during that process, we had to figure out what we can let go of, what we can compromise on. The piece of property that we found ultimately it was almost just as you said how you found your land. It was a friend sent a link that someone sent to her garden club. A woman was trying to sell her land, and it was really important to her to sell to a farmer. And that person chose us. I mean, we just got lucky. She liked us. We liked her. It was a for sale by owner. She didn't inflate the price like everybody else was. It was just lucky.
That's
But
amazing.
at that point, we had spent, I know it was amazing. We spent like I said, driving around, putting letters in
Yep.
mailboxes, contacting everyone I knew. We lost a contract that was pretty devastating before that, so it wasn't like, boom, we got there. But
Hmm.
during that year, this has all happened last year, we also had to run the farm because we needed the income so that we could build up our infrastructure. So I would say last year was probably one of the hardest years of my life because I
Oh,
was trying to have a really profitable year
right.
in business. And also we were trying to like manifest this thing for ourselves.
Yeah.
So we bought the place in February, or I guess March, and then spent the rest of the year just like working our butts off to run our farm and also move the farm at the same time.
Wow. And how far apart are the farms? Your original Pikesville farm and your current Whitehall farm? What's the driving distance there?
Yeah, it's 40 minutes, maybe an hour if traffic is bad. So it's
Yeah.
not terrible, but it's also not,
Yeah, you don't just do
close.
that. You don't just be like, "Oh, I got to run to the other farm." Like that's a commitment. That's like a whole day or a whole afternoon at least to be like, "Oh, I forgot the XYZ back at that farm. Now I got to drive over there and drive back." So, yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. It was. As I'm talking about it, I'm like, we are
You
crazy.
are
It is so
crazy. I
crazy,
am
but
not
we
gonna
did.
lie. For everybody listening, Laura Beth is crazy. No, she's a good
Yes,
friend of mine,
I
and I've
agree.
watched this evolution and and it's inspiring. So everybody should check out Butterbee Farms on Instagram to watch the videos and all the change. Literally, just it's a ton of change you've had in the past 12 months. It's kind of it's beyond mind blowing to me. I'm not sure how you've done it all, frankly, but you're
Yeah,
a
well, thank you.
very
Yes.
determined person.
That is, yes, I will do it. I will get done one way
You
or
will
another.
get it done. It always happens. So, all right. So you've decided the reason you decided to buy land. I think I want to tease this apart a little bit more for listeners to help everybody who is maybe in a similar position right now, sitting on the fence of like, do I buy? Do I stay and lease? How do I do it? So one of the things I considered, well, again, like I said, my situation was slightly different where it was do or die, either buy this land or lose my current existing farm. But one of the things I had always thought was like I would really like to purchase land so that I could start building equity for my farm. So I feel like a lot of times the challenge with leased space is that you can't necessarily build infrastructure. And when you build infrastructure as a business, you are building equity for your future. So there's these things that are now like hardcore tangible things. And I'm talking like barns, greenhouses, I don't know, any sort of literal infrastructure. You can also count tractors and stuff a little bit as infrastructure or as equity. But these are things that help farmers, and in particular, sort of manage the ebb and flows of really good years and then really bad years. So it really helps with tax purposes, with your tax burden, to be able to build equity on your farm, because then you can take the depreciation value. And for the record, I am no accountant. I just had really smart parents who were also farmers who taught me this very early on in my life. But basically, if you can build something, if you have a very good year as a farm enterprise, if you can purchase something big and then lower your tax burden, then you will have long-term financial stability as a farm. When you are on leased land, particularly smaller leased land, there's only so much you can build, if anything, that you can build. And so therefore, you're essentially a cash-based business, which makes you vulnerable to financial security. So not only are you vulnerable in the sense of you don't own the land and somebody could sweep it out from under you at any moment, but you're also sort of financially vulnerable, and you're kind of living paycheck to paycheck, ultimately, like one way or the other. It's just this cash system. So that was one thing I considered strongly when purchasing my land. It was sort of it was like, okay, cool. This is a terrifying move, for the record. I was so freaked out to buy. I mean, my land was super, super expensive because it's in Philly. And it was just like this thing I could not wrap my mind around. Laura Beth, I'm sure you guys had the same like situation where it's just like, holy cow, this is so much money. I don't know how I'll ever pay this off. But I could start seeing, after I got over the initial shock, how I could build. I could build a barn. I could build a really good greenhouse that's going to last me for the rest of my life. I could put in these woodies that will be there for 20, 30 years until I retire. There are all these things that you can now put into place, which would build your equity as a business. So did you have a similar mental approach to it, or how did it kind of work out for you and Joshua, like in general?
No, I would say no, but you're totally right about everything you said. And the thing that I'm thinking about is, so we have a farm service agency loan. I'll talk more about, I'm teaching a class about how we built up the farm called
Right.
Building, what is it called? Building Butterbee Again.
Yeah.
That's what it's called. Building
Yeah.
Butterbee Again. It's an online class. Anyway, I'm going to talk about this in detail there, but just briefly. So farm service agency operating loan, I believe, so how it works is if you are building infrastructure at your new place, they can take that as collateral for your loan. You know what I mean? So like what you're saying was like concretely true for us, because like we didn't own anything yet, right? Like when we were building the farm last year, we didn't like, I mean, yeah, we had our farm, we had the land, we had our mortgage, but we didn't have any infrastructure yet that was equity, right? That was valuable.
Right.
But the greenhouses were about to go up. So farm service agency said, great, we'll take those as collateral. Like that is valuable and we'll recognize that. So what you're saying is that's what happened. You know what I mean? Like we were able to get our loan because of the stuff we were about to build.
Oh, wow. Like, I didn't know that. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. If anyone listening to this is a farm service agent and they're like, no, that's not how it works. I'm sorry. I might've botched it, but that is my understanding of what happened. So anyway,
I don't think any FSA agents are listening to us, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yes. If so, please comment.
Right.
For us, our situation had become so uncomfortable where we were leasing for a lot of different reasons that it honestly, like the fear of buying was less than the fear of staying.
Oh, okay.
The fear of going was nothing compared to the fear of staying.
Gotcha.
And we were both just having a really hard time. So it was more like abandoned ship. You know?
So just I don't need you to go into detail about this, but I just want to clarify for everybody listening. Once you told your landlords that you'd been leasing from that you wanted to leave, the relationship started to get rocky from there. Is that just a correct general statement?
Actually, I felt It's funny. I felt it got better actually after we
Oh,
told them we
okay.
were going to leave. There were just a couple years before that where I think Josh and I were just moving in this direction, and our landlords were moving in the direction they were moving, and
Right.
we were just sort of moving
Yeah.
apart, you know. But actually, when we told them we were going to move on, they were really supportive. I mean, credit to them.
Good.
And in fact, they ended up buying some of our infrastructure, which really helped us build up the new farm. So, yes, it was uncomfortable. I wouldn't say it was bad.
Okay.
It was just like kind of uncomfortable because,
Right.
like, you know, it's like when you leave your job but you like your boss, but it's
Right.
still weird. Like, you
Yeah.
told them you're quitting, but you
Yeah.
still have to work for them for a month, and
Right. That's what
everybody
I was
feels strange about
wondering,
it.
if it was just like it made things super
Yes.
awkward. So,
Yeah. There were some other things unrelated to landlords that were making us uncomfortable too. I will tell you about it over
okay.
a gin and tonic sometime. But anyway, we just had to go, you know.
Yeah.
So it was more like yes, it was, we were just so focused on getting that done. And the mortgage itself is scary, and I feel it more now actually than I did before,
Hmm.
especially because things cost more to build up the farm than we
Yeah.
expected, and we had a few things shift around. We had a personal loan that we were counting
Right.
on that just fell through. So right now I'm definitely feeling like the financial stress of having all
Right.
these loans for the first time that I've never had, from our FSA loan and to our mortgage, and we have
Mm-hmm.
an operating loan too. And we owe one of our contractors a lot of money, and he's just really nice and is letting us delay paying him. You know, there's a lot of pressure right now.
Yeah.
And in the dead of winter, it's a challenge to like
Mm-hmm.
even see how flowers are going to come, and even
Mm-hmm.
see how we're going to have that incredibly profitable year that we've had every
Right.
year for the past 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like with everything in the winter, hope and leap of faith, and like, you know, I keep thinking like I've been doing this for 10 years. Why don't I trust myself more? You know,
Right.
like why don't I believe I can do it more
Yeah.
readily,
Yeah.
you know?
That is a
Yeah.
huge piece of the psychology of being a small business owner, no matter whether it's flower farming or any other kind of small business, is learning that I've done this. You really don't have faith in yourself sometimes, and you need to. Like I struggle with this still. I mean, I've done 15 years of flower farming now, like living off of my own, you know, I've not had an off-farm job in those 15 years. I've just supported myself with Love and Fresh Flowers and build it up. No safety net. And every year, particularly in the winter, for the record, the winter is when I lose my
It's the
brain. It's
winter.
the winter. You just
It's the
kind of go
winter.
off. You're just like, I'm out floating in space. I have nothing to anchor me to a daily routine. And I just sometimes have to just literally, when I wake up in the morning, I just lay in bed and I remind myself, I just lay there, don't turn the lights on yet, but I'm awake and aware. And it's just like this like personal pep talk of just like, hey, you've done this. Like you've done this for so many seasons now. What are you worried about? You're fine. There's money in the bank. It'll be okay. You have a house over your or roof over your head. You're safe. You're safe. You're safe. I just have to keep telling myself I'm safe. And then spring comes and you forget all about that.
Right.
So
That's a wonderful practice.
yeah,
I really
it's
like that a
really
lot.
helped
That's really
ground
nice.
me. It's not one that I started with. It's just something I had to come to terms with over the year. Otherwise, I was literally going to lose my mind in the middle of the winter. So,
Hmm.
yeah. So anybody
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
yeah,
I've been feeling that every year, every winter too. And maybe this everyone probably feels this way
yeah,
in the winter. The thing that I untangled yesterday, as I told you, I since I knew we were going to talk today, I felt like I needed to be in a more positive frame of mind. And it forced me to kind of untangle why I feel so deflated all the time, and why I'm so stressed about the money. And like suddenly the loan feels like such pressure. And what am I doing here? And you know, like all the feelings of winter. And what I realized is I have too much work. My workload is too much, and I need to
mm,
hire some help because every day I feel that I'm not getting my to-do list done. And meanwhile, more things are popping up that need to be done. And I was trying to save money by not having employees right now. But
yeah,
on the other hand, I'm losing crops because I don't have help.
right,
So I'm so happy. I feel so much better realizing that. So I texted a couple people who help us in the winter typically, and they're all on board. And I'm just like,
yay,
oh, I can breathe
you can
again.
breathe.
So yeah, sometimes you just have to like know, like try to hone in on like what is it? What's really the problem? Because the
Yeah,
problem is not that we have a mortgage, right?
right.
Like that's not the problem.
Yeah, no,
So
the
what is
problem
it?
is you're feeling the stress and the anxiety, and you're right. What's the core root of that stress and anxiety for sure? Yeah, I feel like for me too in the winter, I just need to, this was not a planned topic for the record, everybody. This is just now turning into like,
I know we're
like a
going
rabbit
off.
hole. We'll come back out of the
I
rabbit
told you
hole.
it was going to be an
I
exorcism.
know it is. It's just like,
Here we are.
get it all out. But it's like, it's funny because in the summertime, and there's an episode about farmer burnout back from season 2 with Amelia Ilo. So that was like the flip side of that. So for those listening, if you want to feel the emotional roller coaster of farming, go listen to that episode, which was recorded in August. And now this episode that we're recording is in January. And it's like there's such a different emotional mountain to climb in January as a grower than there is in August. In August, it's total physical burnout, like just absolute, and there's like a mental exhaustion too that goes with that. But in the winter, every year without fail, there's this like it's just like a mental health challenge, let's just be honest. Like it's mental health. That's what we have to like tackle in the winter as growers because we're so used to being outside. But where was I going with this? Basically, that it happens to everybody and it happens every year. And for me, what I find is, and this is the first winter I feel like I've kind of doing winter right. And I'm sure I'm totally jinxing myself now for the record, but I am letting myself rest in such a deep way that I've never done before as a grower. And I know it's a privilege to be able to rest so deeply, and not everybody can do it. But I just want to encourage everybody who's listening to understand that sleeping is working. Like in January, you sleeping is actually work. Because only once your body feels truly and deeply rested in the wintertime will you be able to do the work of the growing season. So your job, your to-do list right now needs to include deep rest, whether it's sleeping or maybe, you have another form of deep rest. But for me, it's like normally I don't let myself sleep. I'm just this kind of person that works 18-hour days. And this year I'm like, I'm sleeping and it's okay. There's no shame in sleeping. So I hope for you, Laura Beth, that you find a way to get a little deep rest, because if you don't, this is my experience. If you don't, then every year it's just compounding problems, if you do that. So find a way to rest, darling.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yes, I think my way of finding deep rest is to see friends and just like have really good friend dates. And I definitely have not been doing that enough. So I'm trying to put it together what is going on and like set myself up for having a more successful remaining winter season while we try to finish the barn and get all our greenhouse beds planted and all this stuff. I also need to, as you said, rest and do whatever those things mean to me.
Yeah, I hope that you do, because that's the way you actually have a profitable and successful year the next year, is because you'll be healthy and be able to mentally tackle all the challenges of farming. If you have this brain that's firing on all cylinders instead of one that's just weary and has no more room to stretch, basically. So
yes.
Yeah. So,
yes.
All right.
Actually, the other thing that I'm thinking about, I know we have to move on.
No, go ahead. I was just going to reel us out of the rabbit hole, but I love a good rabbit hole.
Okay.
So go for it.
Yeah. Okay. One more thing down in the rabbit hole, which is we have always wanted to be off-season growers, at least always, like as in the last 5 years, I've always wanted to stop growing in the summer and grow during the shoulder seasons and in the winter. And when we moved, it felt like the right time to make that change because we were making so many other changes too. As you know, we work super closely with our customers. They mean so much to us. Our relationships are super strong to the point that if I felt like we needed like a loan from them, for example, I feel they would give it. Like it's that relationship means a lot to me beyond just like a sales relationship. And I didn't want to, every year have some new big change we were throwing at them. So I was like, you know what, this will just be the year. And we told them that we're going to stop selling from June 15th to August 15th.
Wow.
And during those 8 weeks, we would just flip all the greenhouse beds for fall. We would get ourselves together. We'd go see friends. We'd relax a little bit. We wouldn't have as many employees, so we could sort of be on our own a little more. And then the exchanges, we are going to grow late into the season. So we're going to try to one day hopefully have flowers through Christmas and hopefully have Valentine's Day flowers and all that. So one thing that I am wondering right now in the deep of winter when everything is dark and scary is maybe that was not a good choice because our greenhouse, production has been really delayed. We don't even have heat yet. And now I'm worried that we're not going to make as much money as we need to in the spring. And we already told people we're not going to grow for 8 weeks in the summer. We could totally change that. I mean, they would be thrilled
Yeah.
if we did. But
Yeah.
part of me is like, I think the bigger part of me wants to stick to the decision. And we committed to doing this for ourselves, and we're never going to know if it works unless we try and find a way to make it work.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your advice, actually. What do you think we should do? Should we stick to our summer break?
Yeah, I think I'm going to throw your words right back at you in the most nurturing way possible. Trust the process. That's what you've been trusting the process this whole time. You guys know what you want out of your lives. I've coached a ton of people, and I know you've coached a lot of growers too, through the years in terms of building a business. And the thing that I've always said is that you're building a business that makes you happy. It doesn't matter if your customers are happy. I mean, your customers will be happy when you're happy. And that's not to say be like, whatever, I don't care what you want, rah, rah, rah. But you do have to build a business that works for you, that is the right business for you, instead of worrying about, so like right now, I'm sure you're feeling anxiety about those customers maybe feeling a little, like left out of your cycle or whatever over there. And you maybe now, also aren't going to have flowers for them here in the beginning of the spring the way you thought you were going to. Exactly. And so that feels really scary. But at the end of the day, like you said, you've built such strong relationships with your customers. And I know your customers, so I know they're like super happy and delighted with Butterbee Farms. So that they'll be there when you get back. Don't worry. And they too see this tremendous transition and this big, 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 big project you're bringing on. The fact that you even told people you would have flowers at all in 2023 is like mind blowing to me personally. I would have just been like, yo, everybody time out. Halftime here. Going to go take a break. I'll see you in another year. So in
retrospect, maybe should have.
No, it's all right. I think you're such a good grower, and they'll be very happy for whatever you bring to them. But I think you guys have a good idea. And I would say that for anybody listening is like, you build what you want. And then when you're happy and you feel successful, then your customers will ultimately be happy and feel successful, because you can't help them and guide them and nurture their relationships if you yourself are just broken and battered. So yeah, just
absolutely.
You do you.
Okay,
basically.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. Okay, I might have you give me that pep talk again every day for the next several months.
Oh, I will. Definitely. All right. I'm gonna reel us up out of this rabbit hole, though I do love it. I love a good heart to heart, as everybody knows, and to have a heart to heart with you is always so much fun, Laura Beth. But we're gonna go back to like nuts and bolts, just so everybody listening can kind of have a clear, helpful way forward. So I wanted to touch base again, or just double check. Buying land is very expensive, and you funded yours through FSA loans and personal loans, and going in on this with your parents as a way to sort of split the cost, so to speak. Were there any other revenue sources for you to help buy the land?
Yeah, our savings. I mean, we saved a lot over the years where we didn't have a mortgage. And our situation was very lucky. We lived in a house we lived in on the property for free as part, well, not for free, but it was like part of our payment as groundskeepers. Right. So, 8 years without rent, essentially. We were able to save. Like I said, I'll go into ordering that class, but that's basically the layout. Yeah.
When you were looking at farmland, since you had a choice of hopefully many properties, what were some of the factors you considered in terms of like, did you do soil testing when you were looking at land? Did you do water testing? Did you consider what infrastructure was there? What are some tips, just quick, broad brushstroke tips you would give to people if they're looking for farmland? What would you say they should do?
Yeah, the number one thing for us was we wanted to be up on a hill. That was numero uno, because of climate change.
Okay.
Yep. Didn't want to deal with, you can always add water, but you can take water away, but it's very hard. Yeah. So, Mid-Atlantic, we get a lot of rain, wanted to be up on a hill for that reason. So that was big. Another one was, soil was not actually something that we cared about much, to be
Hmm.
honest. We've always farmed on, it has always been agricultural land, but it had been conventionally corn farmed for
Hmm.
many years and was super depleted and super compacted. And, we've learned how to deal with that. So soil wasn't as much something that we were worried about. Because we were looking with my parents, one of the things that we ended up looking for, yeah, I would say like it was at the top of the list, was the agricultural property, or part of the property, being separate from the residential part,
Hmm.
because obviously my parents didn't want to live in the middle of a commercial farm. And that ended up working out really nicely for us, because I'm used to living right in the middle of the farm, and it is stressful if you're looking out the window, you're trying to have dinner, but you see this like patch of weeds that's taken over your zinnias. It just doesn't feel great. So now I can't even see them from my house, which is so, so nice. I really like that.
Nice.
So yeah, having a little like, work-life balance in the mix was something that ended up being a priority. And then being within a drivable distance to our customers, of course. So like, radius from DC essentially and Baltimore was big. We ended up about 40 minutes north of Baltimore and an hour and a half from DC, which is just under twice as far to get there. So it's not that bad. It adds like 35 minutes to drive to DC. It's
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
So that all worked out great. So I would say those were maybe the top things. And otherwise, we were like, we can figure out everything else,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you consider at all whether there were other flower farmers in the area? Because I know you do have other flower farmers in your area now that you moved to. Is that something that I could see that as being a pro and a con? And I'm asking this question because quite a number newer farmers are now finding themselves in somewhat saturated markets, and it's hard to know whether you should go further afield and try to get away from people, or is it nice to settle into a community of flower farmers?
Mm. Yeah, well, because of our business model, we deliver all our flowers. We have hardly any on farm sales, and we drive to our customers. So unless our customers decide they want to work with some other people, it doesn't matter whether we're next door to all of our competitors or not.
Right.
So yeah, not an issue, I would say. And we are in the middle of like a bunch of farmers. I mean, our local farmers market has one of our big competitors there, but we don't go to farmers market,
Right.
so like it's okay.
Yeah.
And actually, just yesterday, I asked one of the Flowers by Bowers,
Hmm.
Matt Bowers, right up the road, like less than a mile down the road from us. And we asked for his electrician, and he
Yeah.
gave us the name, and now
Yeah.
we're working with that guy. So it's all good.
Yeah, I feel like there
Yeah.
could be a lot of great, synergies, so to speak, by having
Hmm.
other established flower farms around. I don't consider that necessarily a horrible thing. It's all about everybody having their own market niche, or just start a collective together, and then you can all sell under one
Right.
banner or something like that. So, just something to think about. I feel like if I was looking for land again and I had choices, not just like, hey, this land beside me has to get bought or not, I'd be looking at the size of the property, the soil. I would definitely do a soil test. I'd want to get a water test because quite often the quality of the water can drastically impact the longevity of your blooms, and also change things like the pH in your soil if you're irrigating over long-term stretches of time. And then I would personally be looking at like, can a big truck get in? Like, what kind of access can the public get in if you want to, think about your sales model? What are you intending to sell? And then can those vehicles get to you, is one thing to consider. And then just how far away are you from your market location, like where you're selling? And I know you had to consider that, Laura Beth, when you made your move. And then also just what existing infrastructure is on the farm. If I was looking, I'd be like, oh, I'd like to have a nice old barn or, whatever, that kind of stuff. So those are just some things for the listeners who are maybe considering purchasing land or renting. That could apply to rent. Also, when I first started renting my property that I'm still farming, I actually got a water test done because it was well water, and I wanted to make sure it wouldn't kill my flowers, basically. So something to
Right.
consider too.
Yeah, it occurs to me as you say that list that, okay, so we did have a list like that was
Okay.
very detailed, and it had everything we wanted. And we ended up having to throw it out the window
Really? Yeah.
because of the market that we were trying to find land in.
Yeah.
It was so hot. I mean, I think what you're saying is ideal, and hopefully people who
Yeah.
are looking for land have some years to do that, and then they can have that list and refer back to it and be like, how important is this to me, and do all the testing. We were like, if we find something that could possibly work, we've got to
We're
get
going to
it
go
so that
for
we
it.
can move on with our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think what you're saying is ideal, and
Yeah.
people should do that,
Yeah.
and maybe just don't buy at the height of like the crazy housing like you
Right,
did.
right. Yeah, and I'm not saying those are just some ideas for everybody
Hmm.
who's very new and has no idea what questions to even begin to ask. But yeah, like
Yes.
everything in farming, you just kind of have to, at a certain point, just like jump in that current and get washed down the stream and see where you come out at the bottom.
See, exactly.
So it's not
Yeah.
like you can have all the like ideals in the world, but sometimes you just gotta go. You just gotta go. Sink or swim,
Yes.
baby. So, all right. So now my next question, to roll us along a little bit, is you basically, once you bought the farm, you had a clean slate. There were no structures on. I mean, I know you have an old barn. For listeners, there is an older barn on your property that you bought, but essentially where you're farming, it was a blank slate, and now you get to choose what you want to do, and you have all these lessons you've brought with you. So this here is the real magic, everybody. If you had a farm and you were leasing it and you learned all your lessons at that old place, now you get to go to a new place and start over and make really good choices for yourself. So Laura Beth, what kind of choices did you guys make that you were like, we're gonna fix this time?
Yeah, it is kind of a dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, at our old farm, all of our high tunnels were just wherever we had room to put them, as you know, because you've been
Hmm.
there. I mean, they're up on a hill, they're at the bottom of a hill, so they're all far apart from each other. There's no driving access to them. I mean, there's a lot of walking around. So at this farm, we were like, all of our greenhouses are going to be just right next to each other, boop, boop, boop. And we're going to be able to drive around all of them in a circle.
It's
It's just going to be
amazing.
wonderful. Yes. So essentially when we had a map of the farm on, we had like a satellite image from Google Maps, and we made many drawings of that map. But what ultimately happened was we looked at the flattest part of the farm because that's where the heated greenhouses were going to go.
Mm.
We were going to have to grade that so that we could put the greenhouses there. Since they have roof vents, they can't be on a slope like an unheated hoop house that doesn't have a vent. They do really need to be flat.
Hmm.
And grading is really expensive. It was probably one of our biggest expenses here. So we were like, all right, we need to pick the flattest part for the greenhouses. So was the cornerstone, and then everything else got built around that. So first it was what's flattest, or what can be made flattest most affordably. Greenhouses have to go there. Great. And then that means the road has to go in this certain way. That means that the barn has to be over here. That means that the well needs to be close to the barn. It sort of all came from that.
Nice. So basically pick the central radius and then draw, or the axis, sorry, and then just radiate out from there in whatever way makes sense. So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And for us, like greenhouses, just like to give you a picture, if you can picture like a rectangle, the greenhouses are in like the top corner.
Hmm.
So that it wasn't like, I think ideally we would have a perfectly flat piece of land and the barn would go right in the middle.
Hmm.
And then everything else would radiate around the barn. And that is actually what ended up happening here, but we had to think about it more like what's happening in the corner where it's
Right.
flattest,
Right.
and then figure everything
Yeah.
else out.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Were there any other big system changes that you made that could just, sort of apply to anybody looking to build a farm out? Or this maybe is too big of a question and something for another, for your
No,
class or another conversation.
right. We could go on and on and on and on and on. But one huge change that I'm very excited about is at our old property, we had a barn that we could use, but it wasn't our barn. And as you know, we only really had a corner of the barn that we could use. So basically we had a walk-in cooler, and that was what we had in terms of a barn. Here we have a whole barn that we are building that will be right in the middle of the farm. So, for the first time ever, my office can actually be at the barn. So if I'm sitting at my office emailing a florist about inventory, I can walk 10 feet to the cooler and look in there and answer the question.
Ugh.
So just the efficiency of having that there. I mean, it's little stuff, but it's like, this is so simple. But for example, our employees never could make a tea for themselves on a hot day because we didn't really have a barn where they could do that. And they can't just go into our house. Like, that's kind of awkward. So here we're going to have like, tea, and we're going to have like, I don't know, pads and tampons for people, like, it's
Right.
like small
Yeah.
things, but
Yeah. And lockers,
just
I highly
so
suggest getting lockers for employees, by the way. I got lockers for
exactly.
mine and they love it. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, people need to be comfortable so that
Hmm.
they want to come to work and they're excited about it. So they have their sunscreen and their extra pair of shoes. And, it's those little things that I think are really going to change our lives.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about it.
Yeah.
We're going to have a little kitchenette in there. It's
Nice.
just like, all of that is just going to be so great. So really, really excited about that. And then let's see, there was one other thing I was going to tell you about. What was it? Everything next to each other. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this leads into something I know you wanted to talk about, which is the goats.
Oh, yeah.
So at the old place, yeah, we had solar powered electric fences that were about 2 feet high. There was one perimeter around the field fencing, and then 3 feet out from that, there was another perimeter of fencing, and they
Hmm.
were both electric using just like a solar powered electric charger. And we would bait the fence with peanut butter like every week so that the deer
Yep.
would come up to it and like learn. We did that for 10 years, you
It's so
guys,
much
and it
work.
worked
I've done that
great.
too. It's so much work.
Yes,
And then you
it's so much
forget
work.
like one time or you don't get it mowed right or whatever. And then next thing you know, you got deer in your field. So,
Exactly, right. You can also train them to come up to the fence if you're not properly charging it.
right.
So we had essentially 4.5 acres fenced in with, we had like 3 different solar charge. It was like a whole thing. And I'm just so excited to not deal with that anymore. That was a huge priority at the new place. So at first we were like, okay, well, there's a lot of deer pressure here. I would say almost as much as at our old place, although it's a little different because we were in the suburbs and now we're in a rural area. So the deer here seem interested in slightly different things. I've already noticed.
Well, they
But
just have more corn and alfalfa to eat, basically. So they have other food now.
yes, there's
Yeah.
definitely, right. There's more space. There's more space for them to go around things, So it seems as though, well, okay, let me back up. So we said we don't want an electric fence anymore if we can avoid it. So what are our options? I guess a 10-foot fence that's permanent, or a fence like what you use where it's like it's not really permanent, right? Like
Yeah, I could pull it out of the ground if I wanted
you could
to.
pull it out.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. But those are sometimes a little harder with maintenance because
Hmm.
they're not as strong. So if a tree falls, whatever.
Yep.
Anyway, we had some different options. So we went to this farm that, for totally unrelated reasons, we went to visit this farm. Shoot, what's it called? Do you know what I'm talking about? The fig guy.
You've told me about it, but I don't know what the farm name is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Mechanicsburg fig guy. Maybe we can look it up and
Yeah,
put
we'll
it in
look
the
it
show
up and
notes.
put a link in the show notes.
Yeah. He grows a lot of figs, lots of fruit. And when we went to see his fig operation, we saw this crazy fence that he had, which was basically the same as our solar powered electric fence, where it was the 2 perimeters of fencing, but the 2 perimeters were about 10 feet apart, so wider. And goats lived in between those fences, like essentially a moat, like a goat moat.
Yeah, goat moat.
Around the
I
field.
love it. There's a goat moat.
I know. It's a goat moat. So we were like, what the heck is this? Like, aren't your goats getting out all the time and eating all your delicious fruit that is like right next to them? And he was like, no, literally, we've never had a problem, and deer never get in because they smell the goats. Wow. And it deters them. So you're like, this is for us. So that's what we did, and now we have goats.
That is amazing. So I know you just got the goats like a couple weeks ago. We'll do really, because I've had listeners ask about livestock at a flower farm, a small flower farm. So equivalent of like essentially, I don't think I asked you to tell everybody, like, how much in theory acreage are you going to be actually growing on at this new farm? Because it's not that big. And so you are still sort of a small farm, even though you've really dialed it in to like super fine tune everything. But how big is it?
It's funny. It's almost exactly the same. So we had 4.5 acres at the old place, and here we have 4.5 acres too. It's like 4.9 or something, but slightly more of it is taken up by infrastructure than at the old place. Like our barn's right in the middle of it. We've got driveway. Right. So what's happening here is that we have more space under greenhouse cover and less space in woodies. Like that was the trade-off that we made, and slightly less annual flower space, but it's pretty comparable.
Yeah. So and then ultimately your goat moat is around your woodies and your annuals. So your goat moat is not around the whole farm. So it's just around what, like an acre or so? I'm trying to eyeball it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just about an acre. Yeah. Okay. And half of that is in woodies, slightly less than half. No, I guess it's half. And the other half is annuals within that moat.
So this is just to say, to put it in context, that smaller growers who want to introduce livestock, and I'm not talking just chickens, though chickens is great. I'm not saying chickens aren't livestock, but I'm talking four-legged livestock. A lot of times we feel like we need to have a lot of space, or I will say I feel like I need to have a lot of space to introduce livestock in that manner. But yet we all know that ruminants, or a lot of people realize that having hooved animals, let's put it that way, is really good. Their manure is excellent for soil biology, for having better balanced soil, better nutrients in the soil. So they are something that is often considered a pillar of regenerative agriculture. And yet, as small flower farmers in particular, because let's face it, goats could be a horrible idea at a flower farm. And so I've always been terrified of the idea of bringing them because they're escape artists. Like they could get anywhere. So you're taking a huge leap of faith. You're the first person I know that's putting goats on such a essentially small area. How's it going so far?
Yeah. Not only are they in a small area, but they live in a circle around our flower field. So yeah, that's fun. You're right, they're escape artists. I should say there's a couple other reasons why we got them too.
Yeah.
So my husband is really the one, Joshua, he's in charge of all this. So he's really excited about using them for invasive removal. Nobody lived at this property for a couple of years before we bought it, and there's poison ivy everywhere. There's a lot of stuff that the goats are going to eat up, and it's going to be great. So he's very excited about that. And then, as you said, the manure, we're definitely going to be using that, and we're hoping to start creating our own compost more actively and better compost through using the goats to help us with that, and also through vermiculture and chickens. And we're definitely adding livestock heavily for that reason. And then of course the fence is great, and also the cuteness. Don't forget, they're cute, and that makes us happy, and that is a good reason to get goats.
Yeah.
So yeah, they have gotten out a couple times. They've also gotten into the field once.
They did. I was wondering.
So they did. Yeah. What we decided is if they're still getting out come April, then they're going to go to a nice, happy family that is not our family, and we'll get some sheep instead. Sheep are not escape artists, and they'll essentially serve the same function in terms of keeping deer out of the moat, although they won't help us with invasives. It's a slightly different thing, but we have a plan if it doesn't work out. But what we've noticed about them is, yes, they're really smart, but also we're really smart. So the thing is just staying on top of what ways they use to get out, and we've already gotten smarter about it and noticed it, and I actually the past couple weeks have been pretty successful, so we'll see what happens.
And also they don't have a lot to eat right now. I know you're feeding them, don't get me wrong, but there's not that much happening in their moat at the moment. So maybe once there's grass and like more life happening in the moat, they won't be as tempted to leave the moat. Plus I'm assuming you'll take them over to the woods to graze on all the invasives and stuff. So once they have more variety, they're probably just bored right now.
I think they are. They act bored, honestly. So I think that's a big part of it, for sure. Yeah, they're fun. And I think the thing about having them right there, I think it wouldn't work if we were just going to leave them in that moat 24/7. But every night when the sun starts to go down, we put them in a little shed where they're locked in for the whole night, because we have coyotes here. So if we didn't, they probably get eaten. And that way I can sleep and not worry about it. And then in the morning they come out, and then we're at the farm. So, it's so far it feels pretty manageable. And like I said, we've been able to figure out how they got out every time and fix that problem. So I don't really know what's going to happen, but we're excited to try this weird thing.
Yeah, I'm excited for you. And if everybody who's listening, just follow Butterbee Farms on Instagram, because you get goat content, and then I'm sure you'll update us if there's any goat shenanigans in general. And for the record, they're pygmy goats, so that's why you got to worry about the coyotes. I don't think if you had full-grown goats, you would necessarily have to worry about coyotes, but
yeah, we might not. Yeah, they are Nigerian dwarf goats.
Okay.
They're really good for milking, apparently, although that's not something that we're doing anytime soon.
I didn't know you were going to start milking, but sure.
Oh, no, nobody has time for that.
Right, exactly.
So maybe that'll be my retirement project one day.
All right, so tell me, what has been some of your biggest eye-openers in moving your farm? Because I'm sure it feels like you're starting all over again. I mean, you have to. Your soil is going to be a completely different soil. Your layout's completely different. Where do you put all the stuff that you were used to knowing right where it is? So, what are some of the things that maybe anybody who's listening can really understand about this process? What would you just basically tell people who are thinking about moving a farm?
Yeah, you actually just nailed it. It is exactly what you just said. It is that I think I know how long it takes to do things at the old farm. And the thing is, that doesn't really translate at the new place, because A, it's a totally different place with different things and factors, and B, nothing is set up yet. So in order to, for example, weed a bed, I have to go find my hoe, make sure it's sharp, and bring it to the right place. And then, hopefully the greenhouse isn't having some kind of major crisis that I need to figure out. And what, you know what I mean? Josh and I keep saying it feels like there's 10 things we have to do in order to just get this one very simple thing done that normally we just do,
Right.
So allowing myself more time to get things done, smaller to-do lists, and like I said, hiring people to help me, because I literally cannot do all the things that I'm required to do right now by myself, but there's a lot of people who are very capable at seeding and weeding and broad forking who can come here and help me do that so that I can focus on whatever crisis is popping up, or, just even making sure that all of our tools are organized so that we can find them quickly instead of having to spend an hour looking, or,
Yeah.
um, that's something that I feel like we learned the hard way, is just like, wow, it takes a lot of time to set things up, and to set things up right is worth it. So it's worth taking the time.
Yeah. I've always felt that way myself. Like I haven't had to like move the way you have, but this is something that's come to me over the years as a flower farmer, and I'm sure the same for you, is like, yeah, set it up right the first time. Like don't just like half-ass this. Like it's okay to bootstrap stuff a little bit. In fact, I still bootstrap stuff like crazy. I can't even some of the things that are totally bootstrapped around my farm. It's sort of like, Jennie, you're a little too established to keep doing this. Would you just like actually hire a plumber instead of this weird
Right.
tape and thing you got going on? But anyway, at a certain point, it's worth doing it right. Like the more you do it right, the better it'll be in the long term. So I know you're building your greenhouses all over again, and I just built a greenhouse too. And it's like, just put the money into it in the beginning instead of having to like limp through the next decade, essentially. So yeah, I'm sure you've made a lot of good choices that way.
I hope so. A lot of time I'm not sure if I'm prioritizing the right things over other things.
Mm,
So like a small example is we could afford to build 2 greenhouses, but if you build 3, you save on shipping because they're already shipping you the stuff. You save on the build because the builders are already there, right? You
yeah,
save on the plumber because he's
yeah,
already there, the
yeah,
electrician, all those things. So 3 was a huge stretch,
right,
but also think of the savings, think of
right.
the profit. So we built 3. So like it's that kind of decision that I'm like not sure yet if we
Yeah.
called it right.
I think you
I'm
will.
like,
Based on my own
yeah.
experience, I every time I make one of those smart decisions, even though it feels super, super stressful in the moment because it does require more of an investment up front, it is the right decision in the long term. Like putting polycarbonate, we had this in a text thread the other day. I put
Hmm.
polycarbonate on my new greenhouse. The whole thing is polycarbonate, and like that was an extra like $50,000, which seemed like an insane idea at the time. But now I'm reaping like such an amazing climate inside of that house because it's polycarbonate instead of plastic. So
So awesome.
so there's those kind of things. They seem scary in the moment, but in the end, it'll all be good. So
Yeah. If you can afford them, of course. I
yeah,
mean, like, you and I both, as we're saying, bootstrapped for our
yeah,
first 10 years. So now
yeah,
when you're 15 years, right? So
yeah,
now I guess it's just a matter of like, when do you decide
yeah,
to do it the right way and invest in yourself and
yeah,
invest in the future? And when do you decide this is really not something I can afford right
yeah,
now? And,
yeah.
only you can answer those questions
Right,
for yourself.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
context
But
specific.
yeah, but definitely a good dose of bravery is a good
Yeah.
help
Yeah, a lot
in
of
making those
bravery.
decisions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I pick a word every year at New Year's, and 2018 is when I bought my land, and that year my word was courage. And yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I think that summed it up right there. It took a lot of courage.
Nice. What is this year's word?
Endurance is this year's word because I feel like I was
Nice.
getting a little threadbare from buying land and building all this infrastructure and putting so much into it. And I'm 5 years, now 2023 is 5 years after I think it might be 5 years today. That's so weird. I'm going to have to look it up, but it might be 5 years today that I signed the mortgage
Oh
on
my
my pay
gosh, that
on
would be
my
so
that would
cool.
be so cool. I'm gonna have to look. But
Yeah.
anyway, basically, the past 5 years have just been like one hell of a marathon. And you're here now. You know what this feels like. And so this year is like I'm so close to the finish line on just setting it all up and having it all done. And then from there it'll be something else. But I just gotta endure to get through the finish line right now. So
Hmm.
so that's my
I love
word.
that. All right,
Yeah.
mine is going to be hope, I think.
Okay, good.
Hope
Yeah. Or
or
faith.
maybe faith.
Faith. I think
Faith.
faith
Faith
is a
is
good
better.
one for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
faith
gonna
is my
assign
word
you
this
a
year.
word now.
Great, I'll take it, please.
Yeah. So, all right. I know we're gonna wrap it up here because we'll just keep talking, but we're gonna let you go. Is there any final like great piece of advice you have for people who are considering about buying land, or leasing land, just starting a farm or evolving a farm? And also, I know you've got your class that you're going to teach too, so people should definitely tap into that chat for additional resources. You're such a good coach. But anything you want to parting words of wisdom for our listeners today?
Yeah. Yes. I always come back to this. Yeah. Invest in relationships with other growers of all kinds. I could not do what we did this past year without my relationship with you and Michelle Alston from Roots,
Mm-hmm.
with Ellen Frost, who we sell to and who's our good friend and mentor sometimes when we need help. All kinds of people, like also friends who just are sort of at the same level as me, and just we're watching each other and tossing advice back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Investing in those relationships, making time for those relationships that are not, they're not quite friendships, are they? They're like something more. It's like when you were talking about how a farm is an organism, it's like it's a life unto itself. I was like, oh my gosh, like so few people understand that on a deep level, and it just makes me feel so seen that that. So yeah, just finding those people and making time to find them and just getting out there it's so important. Like it's everything.
And I'm just going to amplify what you said there. As I've been building this, the Philadelphia Floral Guild is the collective that I've been helping build here in Philadelphia of flower farmers. And the analogy I keep using with them, and I just put it out here to the world, is like our relationships as growers in that collective is an ecosystem in and of itself. So too often humans just don't, when we say the word ecosystem, we think we're looking through a window at something else. But we are an ecosystem. Even our bodies alone are ecosystems, but like our interactions, relationships with each other are as an ecosystem. The same way as like mycelium are an are linked in with tree roots, and that tree's leaves are falling and providing shelter and housing for worms. That is an ecosystem. And the ecosystem, Laura Beth, you and I are friends and support each other, and with our own ecosystem as well. Everybody is part of an ecosystem of your own human relationships. And then also your farm is an ecosystem and all the things. So thank you for being with me today, Laura Beth. You always bring so much to the show. And I know everybody's going to love hearing your voice again. And you'll probably be back. I suspect you'll be back here.
Yeah, I don't think we covered like half of the list of questions you had.
I know.
So I
There's so much. There's so much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. Be well. Well, that wraps up another energetic episode of No-Till Flowers. I'm so grateful you tuned in and hope you got several new ideas that can help you farm more in step with nature. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next one. Also, please take a second to rate and review the podcast wherever you're getting it. Reviews help grow this show and let others know that it's worth a listen. Many thanks to Matt Moran, the post-production manager of No-Till Flowers, for his meticulous editing so you don't have to listen to too many of my outbursts of excitement and laughter. Also, gratitude goes to Nikolai Fox for the original music used here on the show. Until next time, remember, it all stems from the soil.